Damo here for Automotive Superstore. In this video, the top 5 things you need to know when buying a mono amplifier. Let's get stuck in. So tip number 1. This might surprise a few people, but start with the subwoofer system, not the amplifier. So there's a couple of reasons for this. When you're choosing your subwoofer array, you've got a lot more things that are restricting you. So you've got how large the enclosure is going to be, where the subwoofer is going to go. Can I fit 1, 2, 3, 4 subwoofers in the car? Once you've arrived at that, you will then know how many voice coils that there are, what kind of voice coils, are they 2 ohm, are they 4 ohm, are they going to be wide in series, in parallel, and how much total power you're actually going to need. And you don't know which mono amplifier you're really going to need until you've decided that. So start with choosing your subwoofer array first, and when you're finished with that, you'll know how much power you'll need and into what impedance load. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. First of which is that amplifiers make their ideal or their most power into a specific impedance load, and that load's created by the subwoofer itself or the speaker itself that you attach to it. The thing is, some amplifiers like this Selwyn Vega and this Selwyn Vega make their maximum power into a 1 ohm load, whereas this Pioneer and this Kenwood mono amplifier, they make their ideal power into a 2 ohm load. This is a dual 4 ohm voice coil subwoofer. It's rated to handle around 400 watts RMS, so any amp between 4 and 500 watts RMS is going to be fine. If I wire the coils in parallel on this amplifier, a 4 ohm load and a 4 ohm load in parallel, which means positive to positive, negative to negative, and then to the amplifier, that'll arrive at a 2 ohm load. Therefore, I'm going to get the full power out of either of the Pioneer or Kenwood amplifiers, but not quite out of these two Selwyn Vega amplifiers. Now hold on a second, what if I want to run 2 of these? So I have a 4 ohm voice coil, a 4 ohm voice coil, and then another 2 4 ohm voice coils. With 4 4 ohm voice coils wired in parallel, I arrive at a 1 ohm load, and I also need double the power because I've got 2 subwoofers to power. And now all of a sudden, these 2 amplifiers from Selwyn Vega that make power into 1 ohm become much more suitable. This one makes about 600 watts RMS into a 1 ohm load, and this one 1000. And so, depending on how many woofers you use and what kind of voice coils they've got, the amplifier choice that's ideal may change. So one more quick thing on impedance and power and amplifiers. And this is really kind of important. Don't ever run your amplifier at an impedance load that's lower than the impedance load recommended by the manufacturer. So for these two, for example, it's a 2 ohm minimum load. For these two, it's a 1 ohm minimum load. If you run them lower than that, so half an ohm or an ohm for these ones, it's too much current flow for the amplifier. It's not designed to do that, and you will hurt the amplifier, you might break the amplifier, and it might not even be covered under warranty if you do so. So it's really important to make sure that you run your amplifier to the minimum impedance that they recommend and not below. Now for tip number 2, and that's to do with all of the switches and dials on the side. A lot of this is the signal processing built into the amplifier, and it's how you unleash the maximum sound quality. Let's talk through those. The most important one for a mono amplifier is the low pass filter. The filter slope for amplifiers differs. Some are 12 dB per octave, some 18, some 24. I prefer 24 because it just sounds cleaner, the bass sounds tighter, and it blends better with the front speakers. Next up is something called a subsonic or infrasonic filter. It takes away the very, very low bass information. It's actually a high pass filter. It's ideal for something like a ported box application where you've got a ported box tuned at, say, 40 Hertz. You don't want to feed the subwoofer anything below 40 Hertz because it's unloaded or effectively has no power handling down there. And actually at half an octave below 40 Hertz, so what's that, 30 Hertz, the port is actually out of phase of the woofer itself, and so you have 0 power handling at all. That's terrible. So you can set that subsonic filter at just below the port tuning frequency and protect your subwoofer. Then there's bass boost. Now you need to use this very sparingly, and that's because your bass boost doesn't make your amplifier any more powerful than it already is. So this 1000 watt amplifier doesn't make any more power if I turn the bass boost up. What actually happens is you guarantee that the amplifier will distort at that frequency before anywhere else. And so you need to adjust the input sensitivity level down a little bit, commensurate with how much bass boost you apply to avoid what's called clipping or distortion. Tip number 3. what kind of additional features are going to be handy for your application. So you can see here with these 4 amplifiers that 3 of them come with a nice remote level controller. I love these, they're really handy. Now the Kenwood one doesn't come with one, but you can buy it as an option. What that actually means is you're not going to pay for it when you buy the amplifier. So if you've got an aftermarket head unit that has sub-level control, you're happy to use that. Maybe you don't need that feature for your specific application. Then there's the input mode switches. Some amplifiers have these, some don't. So for example, this Vega here and many of the Vega amplifiers have a 3-position switch. What that allows you to do is you can turn the amplifier on and off in various different ways depending on the installation. If you've got an aftermarket head unit that's got a trigger output, you can just feed a trigger in and you can use that to turn the amplifier on and off. Alternatively, this can be set in a different position and it'll look at an incoming music signal from your RCAs or speaker level and turn the amplifier on and off with that. You can even look at the voltage on the power inputs and decide, the car's turned on, turn the amplifier on, car's turned off, turn the amplifier off. Not all mono amplifiers have this feature. It's very handy in certain applications, so if you need that, you've got to find a model that has it, like the Vega amplifiers. Then there's things like RCA pass-throughs. The Pioneer GM D series has that. You'll see there are 2 sets of RCAs on this. One is for an incoming music signal and one can pass on to another amplifier. And so if your source only has one set of RCA pre-outs, but you've got multiple amplifiers to feed signal, pass-through RCAs can be very handy. So now tip number 4, decide where the amplifier is going to go in your car before you buy one. And that's because there are physical size differences between amplifiers, even of very similar power output. This Pioneer and this Vega, they make power within about 1 decibel of each other. They're almost identical, but the Pioneer is physically a much larger amplifier than the Vega. And so if your car has a very limited amount of space, maybe you're going to have to invest in an ultra compact amplifier like this one. Whereas if you've got a car with heaps of space, the Pioneer might be an excellent option for you. You've also got to think about where all the controls are for the amplifier and where the wiring is going to run. So some amplifiers like this one here have controls at one end and inputs at one end, and then power, earth and trigger and speaker outputs on the other end, and you've got to factor that into where the wires are going to run through the car. Other amplifiers like this one here, you'll find all the controls on the top of the amplifier and every single connection is along one face. And so all the wires are going to run a different way in your car. And for example, if you put this under a seat that's a very low seat, you might not be able to get to these controls or even see the controls to be able to adjust them. If you've got actually lots of space beneath your seat, it might be actually ideal for you. So where the controls are and where the wires run on your amplifier are actually kind of important, and that helps you choose the right amplifier for your specific installation. Now for tip number 5. Now we know the amount of power we're going to be making from the amplifier, we know where it's going to be mounted in the car, we also know the distance it is going to be from the battery. And we need that information to work out exactly what the perfect wiring kit is for that amplifier. So consider where the amplifier is going to be, and if it's very close to the battery, then you can go for a smaller power and earth cable. If it's very far away, it needs to be larger. I'm going to put up a chart here that will show the distances between battery and amplifier and power output from the amplifier and advice on what size power and earth cable you should be running. And so at the very entry level, you've got something like this one here. It's an 8-gauge amplifier wiring kit. It doesn't come with interconnects or RCAs to connect between your source unit and the amplifier, and this presumes, for example, you're putting this into a car and you're going to be using speaker level inputs for the amplifier. You can just add a pair of RCAs to that at any point if you like, and actually what's handy about that is if your amplifier is really close to where the head unit is, you can just buy a 1, 2 or 3 meter set of RCAs as opposed to the 5 meter length that would come in the kit that includes RCAs as an option to this kit. At the other end of the scale, if you're into your bass and you've got a very, very large amplifier system, Vega has the 10 gauge 2-channel kit, and that'll service amplifiers making 1000 watts RMS plus. So now you're equipped with everything you need to know to buy a fantastic mono amplifier and wiring kit to match. So jump on a link down below, grab yourself a smoking deal at our store as always. While you're down there, like and subscribe. See you next time.